math intensive committee of IMACC, and I also see a couple of people on that committee that are on the call today, which is Bob Capetta, who's been very supportive of this research in granting me space at their annual meetings to share findings, and I also saw Linda Blanco, so hello. Set some ground rules. I love chat. I'm teaching on Zoom. I'm coming to you from Seattle, Washington. I use Zoom all the time, and I love when the kind of talks where people put stuff in the chat window. The emojis, the reactions at the bottom are really cool. If you like what you're hearing, signal that to your colleagues by thumbs up. If you're shocked, so feel free to use your reactions to throw stuff into the chat. Michael's going to help monitor that. Let me start my presentation. And oh, one more ground rule I thought of. Like if something happens here where Zoom crashes, hopefully not, but we have to expect the unexpected. If that happens, I'm just going to log back on. So don't sweat it. Don't sweat it. Just come back in because we've got a lot of people online. I'm going to talk to you about the topic of racial equity in college mathematics. The focus is on a grant that I've been part of that focuses mainly on the STEM math pathway. However, a lot of what I talk about today is probably more widely applicable, but we got into this project because community colleges are really the engines for creating racial equity in college mathematics in the STEM area, because of large numbers of students of color that enroll in our institutions. So I was involved in a national study of calculus in 2012 that started. And as that grant wound down, I was approached to say, hey, Helen, National Science Foundation would love to see more work done in the STEM space in math in community colleges. And so on a daily basis, I teach. My college has been really great in providing me some space and release time to do research. I have been involved in numerous projects, but I have my feet in several worlds. One is the community college mathematics world, but the other is just like the general community college student success research. And I've always wanted to bring those two things together. So when I thought about this grant, we pulled together an interdisciplinary research team. So we have myself and Dr. Mesa from University of Michigan. She's a math education expert. And then Dr. Wood, Dr. Thrill, and Dr. Zamani Gallagher, who, by the way, is in your state at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. Those researchers focus on the psychosocial transition of students into community colleges. So they're like equity researchers. So we brought us together, and it's really exciting. The grant is over now, except for a year of dissemination. And of course we're writing, and of course this is really my life's work, so it's not going to end. But this has been a great time to take what they know and what we know from math education and put it together. So my hope is that what I share with you today is going to validate the work that you're already doing and give you additional ideas and kind of up all of our games around this area of bringing about racial equity, whether it's in the STEM math pathway or others. I always like to say that I'm grateful to the National Science Foundation for their support, also to the support for my college, Highline College. My college, I live in Seattle, and my college is about 20 miles south, and over the last 20 years has completely changed in terms of student demographics because Seattle has become so expensive. So just some of our statistics, we have 25% recent immigrants and refugees at our college who are being located in South King County, where the college is. 70% of our students identify as students of color, and that's a plurality. Many, many, many students identify as multiple or more than one race. That's a big trend that I'm seeing. I teach in mainly statistics now because that's become such a hot area of the curriculum.
Hey, Helen, can I interrupt you for a second? Yeah. I just want to make sure, are you sharing the correct screen? Are we good here?
Yeah, I'm still on the main screen.
Okay,
right?
okay.
Yeah, just to give you a little bit of context. And but thank you for bringing that up, because the deal is, I thought, I need to say something about how did I get here to the point that I am, talking about racial equity in mathematics. So and a lot of it is because of the personal experiences I've had at my college, seeing the demographic shift and being involved in so many different projects. And I just wanted to share before I move that I've been teaching for 3 years now in the Umoja Black Scholars Program, doing a special stats class just for that cohort. And in that experience have committed myself to modifying my practices to disproportionately benefit students of color. So that's where I'm at. The research I'm going to talk to you about today started with a national survey, and I know many colleges in Illinois participated, a national survey of community college chairs. Then we moved into doing some case studies. We visited 4 colleges. We're focusing on African-American, Hispanic serving institutions. Anapeasy colleges. Anapeasy is Asian American, Native American, Pacific Islander colleges. And then we also visited a tribal college. There's a siren. We spent this last year finishing what we're calling our institutional self-assessment tool that I'm going to share with you today. And that went through a content validation by our advisory board.
Sorry, Helen, again, sorry. You have this screen that has the Google Slides on top of your actual presentation. There it goes. Good to go. Awesome.
Oh, so you mean the presenter form shows up as a screen?
Yeah, we're good to go now. Thanks.
That's it. That's good to know though, folks. I'm using Google Slides, which I love Google Drive, and I was doing the presenter mode, but you're telling me that you all see my presenter slide. Very interesting. All right. Good thing I practice so that I don't need my notes. All right. And again, am I able to see the chat window? Maybe. Cool. All right. And thank you for those comments. All right. I'm going to start with some assumptions. And I also wanted to make the session a bit interactive. But now, Michael, I'm going to have to call on you. Well, maybe. I think I can do this. One of our assumptions in our work is that if you want to create racial equity, you have to take on race-conscious approaches. One of the things that we tend to do in our world is we tend to develop an intervention that's going to lift all ships. Rising tide lifts all ships, but it doesn't do much to close equity gaps. So I wondered which student subgroups are a priority at your college. And I have, again, this is going to be a little bit kludgy because what I have here is I'm going to have to do it this way to copy my link. I'll send this to everyone. I thought you might want a chance. Not everyone I expect to participate, but some people like to engage. And so, and obviously, if we were together, we would be in here at small tables having some discussion with who are you focused on at your college? And that really matters because a lot of student subgroups need assistance. Our veteran students need assistance. When you start, for example, women, we've put a lot of focus in our field on women. But when you think about developing race-conscious approaches, that can even be complicated because racism manifests differently by different groups. And we've seen that most recently with the racism that Asian Americans are experiencing. That can be very different than the racism that our Black or African American students. So even if you want to think about racial equity, you even have to go further to think about what group are you focused on. And that's one challenge that my college has because we have a plurality. We have Pacific Islander students, African American students. We have a large group of East African immigrant students. So as we develop interventions and think about improving, it can depend on the student subgroup. So I'm going to leave this. Our second assumption, so first, race consciousness. Second is many different areas of the STEM math pathway need attention. And these are the domains that we've identified in our research. There's 5 of them. And within each of these domains, we've developed a set of equity practices within each domain. Now, I don't want to overwhelm you to think that, wow, we've got to do a lot, but the answer is you do have to do a lot. So we have institutional responsibility. I'm going to go through each of these. Math placement, a lot of us know about math placement, STEM math courses, instruction, out-of-class student support. So it takes a lot of different areas of focus. And I want to demonstrate that by showing you a slide, what research shows. So first off, we have a long history in the United States of connecting race to intelligence, wrongly so. But that can be heightened in a math course because math is like where people, if you're smart, you're good at math, that there's kind of these stereotypes. So racist descriptions of intelligence get heightened in a math course. A second thing to think about is in the STEM math pathway in particular, and it's true across, but in the STEM math pathway in particular, students need out-of-class support. The classes are hard, there's many of them, and help-seeking patterns can be influenced by race, ethnicity, and gender. So I'll start with like the gender thing to say men generally are less likely to want to ask for help. Looking vulnerable is not a positive thing for a lot of men. And that is Dr. Wood's research on Latinos and African-American males shows that it can even be heightened by racial groups of the challenge of asking for help and appearing weak gets in the way of students asking for the help that they need. But if you look at a different racial subgroup, which one of the groups we studied in this project was Southeast Asian students. I'm thinking about Vietnamese students, Cambodian, Thai, Hmong students. Those students, as it's been made more aware recently, those students can suffer from the model minority myth, where Asians are good at math. And that can get in the way of them asking for help because it violates the model minority myth. So I bring this up to say that it's complicated when you want to try to bring about racial equity. You actually have to educate yourself about some of the challenges and some of the racial stereotypes and how that influences student behavior. Another thing I want to admit, students don't come as blank slates. Students have had prior education in K-12 that they bring to college. And in the case of mathematics, that experience is not often positive. One of the delicate subjects as a white woman is that most students have had white female math instructors throughout K-12. So when they enter your classroom, they have some maybe assumptions about you and how you're going to be in that you have to then make extra effort to moderate. Students also, let's bring a little race ethnicity into this third bullet. Many African-American students have disproportionately suffered suspensions, assumptions of criminality. The research shows, oh, and I should say here, I never mean all. Like when you're talking about social science research, there's general trends, but it's not like mathematics where there's for all statements. No. So I never mean all. I'm going to share some general trends, but just keep that in mind. Many African-American male students in research have reported that they've sensed that we're afraid of them when they get close to us in class, or they're walking around campus and people, don't want to engage them out of fear. So assumptions of criminality, ascriptions of intelligence, these have long histories. And then the other thing that you need to realize is race ethnicity is correlated with first generation and socioeconomic status. So some of these equity practices I'm going to talk about today are really about maybe economic stress or first generation student challenges, but it's correlated with race ethnicity. So I wonder, math placement, I'm sure is a hot topic. STEM math pathway courses, instruction, out-of-class student support, institutional responsibility. I'm going to say more about that as that's things that your upper administration is in charge of. So I wonder, what domains have you been focusing on? Now we are going to have time for questions at the end, but we can also go and review these. So I am going to have to do this the Kludgy way, where I grab my copy of my link and put it in the chat. But here is a second document in case you'd like to interact and share. And this one, you might want to put your college name. What have y'all been doing? I know you've been doing a lot because everyone in our field has been doing a lot. So what domains has your college been focused on? And while you think about that, I'm going to show you 2 colleges that we worked with. These colleges responded to our national survey, and this is a partnership. Our grant is supported by IMACC as well. So we developed something called Calculus Allies. So just to demonstrate the multiple components that need attention, Wake Tech, which is in North Carolina, they had the institutional support up here because their strategic plan was focused on underrepresented groups. And what they decided to do was focus on courses and instruction. So they redesigned their pre-calculus with what they call a spiral approach, and they wrote their own lab manuals because they felt really strongly about, they wanted students to have certain activities and experiences. So they wrote their lab manual, and then to improve overall instruction besides the lab manual, and by the way, faculty, instructional materials have a huge influence on what we do in the classroom. But they also made a faculty leadership to work towards evening the instruction, and they coordinate their outcomes assessment. One thing that we know, students can have very different experiences depending on which faculty member they have, even though they're taking the same course. And that actually is an interesting thing that's really coming out right now in the co-requisite space, which I'm also involved in. It can be very uneven, the experience for the student across instructors. Howard Community College, on the other hand, is in a state where they didn't have the option to tinker with their curriculum. Now, I know in Illinois, you all can actually change, you can do your own thing on the pathway to calculus and can work on rearranging the topics within the calculus sequence. So you have a little bit of freedom. They don't, Howard College. So what they did was, in order to enhance student success, they focused on the upper level STEM courses, and they built in an honors calculus, and they did companion seminars for linear algebra and differential equations. So that's kind of a curriculum, it's not necessarily a course level, the honors calculus is, but they did things for out of class student support, and then they linked it to other campus initiatives. So they had a research journal, and now they include math submissions. And then outside of the math program, but in the STEM area, they have a STEM scholars program and a STEM learning community. So these are, I hope, are just 2 models to show you that multiple approaches are required. Multiple approaches are required, and here's what 2 colleges did. We're going to now move into the meat of the presentation, where I'm going to share this institutional self-assessment tool. What is the easiest way for me to get that, since I can't? I'm going to go over to Shay. This is my research, or this is my research website that my college gives me. And these are where you can access the equity practices. So let me put that in the chat window. Let me see. And there's a 1-pager. That's pretty nice. You can see all of them on 1 page. I am going to go through these, hopefully in an exciting way, but this is the bulk of what we developed, our different areas of focus, our domains with our practices. But we also, I want to focus on the institutional self-assessment tool, which is the full-blown tool. We also have if you're interested in, what we're hoping here is, we're not trying to be prescriptive. We're trying to give you ideas about equity practices that you can then use these tools to have a discussion on your campus. You can use them individually just to reflect for yourself. If you're interested in engaging a little bit more with me on this topic, you're welcome to actually take this web-based survey where you go through the practices, and then I can issue you a report. So we've got a couple different forms. Now, the pandemic is really an opportunity to reflect, to plan, to build infrastructure, and hopefully an action plan around this. One of our challenges is everyone's being asked to look at equity. Everyone's being asked to look at disaggregated data, but it's not often, our field is not at the space where we really know what to do with that disaggregated data. So let's start with our first domain. And I'm going to linger here for a moment. Math placement. This is what our self-assessment tool looks like. This has been validated. These are the practices. There's 3 practices around math placement. Those are on the left. And then you have an opportunity to interact. Is your college implementing these practices? And are the majority of your underrepresented, racially minoritized students aware of this class or aware of this practice? URM is the acronym that the National Science Foundation uses. We tend to talk more about racially minoritized students. Students of color are not underrepresented in community colleges, always. Often, they're majority, but they are underrepresented in STEM. Students come to us as whole humans. They are racially minoritized by the larger culture. So we tend to say racially minoritized students. So in math placements, our equity practices are around using multiple measures, including high school transcripts, having advising about placement available during the process, and having policies and practices in place to ensure highest possible placements. Now, these are probably familiar because math placement has gotten a lot of attention. I want to share a few things about placement, though, from our national survey. First off, most of the chairs that we surveyed knew that placement matters. Now, placement really matters for the STEM math pathway because the STEM math pathway is so long. There's so many classes that it's super important to place students accurately. And we have lots of research that shows we've been misplacing students, underplacing students. So a lot of pressure around equity on placement. I know you've done a lot. Now this data is from 2017. So 65% of the chairs said that they're already using more than one method to place students. And these numbers have probably gone up, but at the time that we did the survey, it was about less than 25% were using high school grades and high school GPA. And those have been shown to be very valid predictors of a valid way to place students. And then directed self-placement is down here at 2%. So these numbers have probably gone up, but this is a baseline. Again, and the other thing about, remember, our field got disrupted when Compass went away. So this is something to think about at your college, what you're doing in terms of placement methods. And then I wanted to highlight these policies, because this is a very interesting finding. So one policy that's really a benefit is there a process to test out of math courses? And if you look at the bars, you can see that on our sample size, we had like 500 response. It was almost a 50% response rate, which is pretty high for a national survey of community in the community college space. So colleges often had a process to test out. The majority that responded did, but the process was less likely to be in place at the calculus level. That was interesting to us. Can faculty at your college override a placement recommendation? They can at my college. That's a big deal, so that one-on-one you can consult with students. And do you have a process to revisit or adjust after placement after the term has begun? So these are examples of policies, and you can see the trend is the policies are less generous the farther you go up in mathematics. We thought that was interesting. Our real challenge in our field is to think about why might these practices, and I've listed the ones for placement, why might these practices disproportionately benefit underrepresented racially minoritized students in the STEM math pathway? So that, I think, is where we're at. And so let me say a little bit about that, because I think this is where we really need to grow, to be able to say, oh, disproportionate benefit, here's why, to build that knowledge. All right, placements. If you underplace students, it requires more money, more time. That can have a disproportionately negative impact on students of color because of that correlation between race, ethnicity, and socioeconomic status. Another thing to think about, not as just additional cost, and the research does show that requiring additional courses does affect persistence in a negative way. But here's another thing. If you have a student, and just visualize a young Latina that comes to your college and thinks that she's interested in STEM, she's been a high-performing student in her high school, and then she comes to your college and she takes a placement test and gets placed into a low developmental math class that she doesn't think is required. That can affect her negatively, her self-identity around around belonging. Am I good enough for STEM? So it's super important. There's like the additional cost, but there's also the psychosocial impact of misplacing students. So what we're going for here on these equity practices is that a student would come to your college, and whatever happens to them, whether they end up in a developmental math course, which is usually about 50%, or not, whatever happens to them, they feel like they've been treated fairly. Because for many students, they have had negative experiences with institutions. So that's what we're going for. Perceptions of fairness around your placement policy, more students placing into the college, and even at college level, and even if they get placed into developmental math, they at least have felt they've been treated fairly. So I'm going to linger here before I move to the next area to say I believe that our challenge is to understand disproportionate impact so that we can design for disproportionate benefit. And I'm wondering how you receive that idea. We have to understand disproportionate impact, why different practices are going to disproportionately negatively influence our African American students, our Latinx students, our Southeast Asian American students who are suffering mightily as well. Cambodian, Thai, Vietnamese, most of the research is coming out of California, very low educational outcomes, and yet they're invisible because they suffer from the model minority myth. So as my third interactive area, I put together, because I thought, you know, yeah, you can go to the website and see these different things, but I also thought, maybe some of you during the last, I don't know, 20 minutes or so, want to actually jump in here. And these are the different areas, the domains with the practices all listed. So you can take this, and this one you can edit. So I'll copy it, put it into the chat. If you want, jump on in here. And I did this at IMACC, and wow, it was really powerful. I think sometimes because equity work is only beginning in some spaces, but for a lot of us, we've been thinking about it for a long time, and we have a lot to say, and there are a lot of us. You're not alone if you're out there working on equity and feeling like, wow, it's been a long time coming. So if you want to jump in here as I'm talking, like I just talked about placement, I kind of gave you some ideas of why disproportionate impact. But if you want to jump into any of the other domains, you can. And notice I've goofed my numbering. There's number 1, there's number 2, and then I jumped to number 4. That's because number 3 is instruction. And I want to end with instruction because I think a lot of you are going to be interested in what we have to say about classroom instruction. So let me go back and just spend a bit of time on breezing through these. Our next domain is STEM math pathway courses. Now, this is where I'm like, darn, I don't have my presenter slide, but I got these numbers in my head. So here's what I can tell you from a national survey. There is less innovation in the pathway to calculus. There's less innovation compared to all the innovation we've done in developmental math. Most, like 92% of the survey respondents said they only offer a standalone calculus. That's it, Calc 1, no flavors of calculus. Our field is all over the place on the pre-calculus pathway. We are all over the place. College algebra, trig, it's like all over the place. Okay, so when we had to settle in, what can we recommend? We settled in on optimize. Make sure your course sequence and the course materials are optimized for timely progress. Have you done that? Think about it. Think about, even if it's a symbolic effort, the message that sends to your students that yes, we know that this is the right number and we've tried to minimize the cost, and think about why that would have disproportionate benefit. Next, courses should transfer to baccalaureate institutions. Students should never have to worry about transferring. That's obvious. And this is also the domain where we put the examining data. So the practice that we identified is student data on math pathway courses is disaggregated by race, ethnicity within gender. Now, I know most of us are just getting data on race, ethnicity, but truthfully, male, female, our racial identity and our gender identity are two things that really influence the way that we interact with the world. So, and we all know men and women can have very different experiences in math classes. So we recommend that be reviewed annually. So those are our 3 math pathway courses, equity practices. You can reflect here on whether you're doing these, whether they're possible, and also do your students know about them? Our next area, again, I skipped number 3, is student support. And this one's really cool. Think about, why would it disproportionately benefit a student to know their current grade standing throughout the term? Some of us would think we don't need to do that. So why would that have disproportionate benefit? I'm going to skip the second one and just go to the third and the fourth. Tutoring and instructor office hours. That's super important. Are available. Our advisory board threw in the easily accessible. Is your tutoring accessible easily? Is the instructor office hours easily accessible? And number 4 is another equity practice that's out in the literature that we saw in our project too, in the case studies, that you highlight these support services in the syllabus and during instruction. It's not just a one and done, that you're constantly reminding students about the support that's available. This number 2 is really interesting. The National Study of Calculus and this project, when we went to visit our exemplar case studies, our case study colleges, they were very proud that they had dedicated space on campus for students to work on math. Okay, so there's a couple things I'll talk about disproportionate benefit. Number 1, when students are underrepresented and don't see them reflected in the STEM world, they need community. So it's a community building space. Also, they need help on math. So it's a great place for them to build community and help each other on math. Sometimes students have complicated home lives too. Like the college I visited, they knew that their Southeast Asian students had a lot of family responsibilities when they got home, and including like serving as interpreters, so that it was important that they had a space on campus so that they could get their work done before they went home. But check this out. What they were most proud of, and this was in the National Study of Calculus in this study, is there was a space for them to check out faculty and interact with faculty outside of class. So that faculty could go check out the student study area, say hi, colleagues. Faculty-student interactions, when they're positive, have a long history of research about the benefit to students. Connecting with us is important, and that was a space to do it outside of class. I like what I'm seeing in the chat window, and I'm glad this is triggering you, because a lot of people are doing virtual Zoom spaces. And this is the part where I'm just like, wow, I know our students are suffering because they're kind of isolated and alone. So thank you for putting those ideas into the chat window. Here's a big one. And I don't know if we have any STEM deans, department chairs on the Zoom call today, but institutional responsibility. This, it's important that there's some alignment between what you're trying to do in your math program and what the institution is doing in this space. So, permanent base funding. Is your college providing permanent base funding to support URM STEM student success? Like my college has a MESA program that's fully funded, and we are also part of a, we also have a big learning community cohort that's funded permanently. Permanent base funding, not just a grant, permanent base funding. The college needs to offer, and I'm sounding kind of prescriptive here because this one's a real obvious one. We need high quality ongoing professional development on things that matter around inclusive teaching, and it needs to be full and part-time faculty. And there's a lot of drama in this area because one and done professional development, including kind of what I'm doing here, it's not always that effective. Professional development needs to be sustained and ongoing, but more importantly, no one is going to change unless you're willing. There's a lot of drama around professional development. There was an executive order that says diversity training that's divisive. None of that, that's been rescinded. But most importantly is, if you are an equity-focused researcher, don't get frustrated by the people that don't join the party. It takes a willingness. So form your team and just realize some people are just not going to want to play along. All right. And then, of course, students are definitely in need, and this is where race and socioeconomic status come together. So, last, cool. I think I've got 15 minutes left, and I'm hoping to leave some time for questions. If you want to start putting your stuff into the chat window, kind of wondering, are we getting any hits in here? Not seeing it. All right, that's all right. I want to talk about instruction, end with it because I thought you'd be very interested in that. And again, on a daily basis, I teach. I'm doing virtual teaching on Zoom now. All right, what we did, we went out to what the literature says about good math instruction and inclusive teaching. So we had Vilma Mesa and others over here, and we had Dr. Wood and Dr. Zamani Gallagher and Dr. Thrill over here. I kind of straddle both worlds. So we knew what is the recommendations. And then we actually went into classes and did observations. We observed a range of classes, many of them students, and we looked for both. Now, this is kind of techie, but I know we always have a few researchers on the line. Here's the form that the math person was filling out. I was tracking what problems are they working, what questions are being asked by the teacher or the student. Are they referring to relevance? Relevance doesn't just mean real world application. Making the math relevant could be saying, hey, this is important for a future class. We tracked what the students were doing. All of these student engagement, this is individual work, pair work, board work, small group work, lecture with limited response, okay, all of it, super techie, in 5-minute intervals. The other person was looking at these kinds of practices. This is the inclusive teaching, and this is like the gold star. Welcomeness, validation, empowering students. We know that our students need us, especially in the STEM math pathway. They need to know that their work is paying off and that they have a bright future. That's what empowerment strategies are, helping students realize they can do this and they have a bright future, positive future. All of these things are aspirational. Okay, so we took these and then we analyzed it, and then we developed some equity practices around instruction, and they're in 2 parts. There's the mathematical and there is the relational. So I'm going to start with the mathematical. What we know from math ed research is active learning is espoused, aspirational goal. What we saw was that students were actively involved in problem solving. Sometimes it was just a worksheet, but we saw students' active involvement in problem solving is central to math instruction. Often the classes we observed were crowded, but there was time in class for students to actually solve problems in class. Think about, why would that have disproportionate benefit to an African-American student at your college? Another aspirational goal of math ed is using student thinking, making it visible. How are students understanding this material? Making that visible and using that to advance the lesson. We actually didn't see that. What we saw was that students were invited to discuss and share their thinking with each other, often in pairs. But there was this sharing in class. So what we have developed here is a set of practices that maybe are realistic for like what a typical classroom is. Faculty did make mathematics relevant. That was in different forms, but they did often explain to students, and that's a general adult learning theory principle. Adults benefit when they know why they're learning something. And then, of course, we always need to keep the mathematics content challenging in terms of cognitive demand. And here I'll cite the TIMS study that showed that we often have this aspirational, hey, I know what I want to achieve, but we devolve into teaching by telling. That's the K-12 literature there. So think about these 4 practices and whether these are things that resonate with you. You're doing these things, maybe you're going beyond, but these are our equity practices in the mathematics instruction area. When we move to relational, and this is my last idea to share with you, I'm going to linger on just a couple of these. So the first one is authentic care and welcomeness to engage are expressed to students. What the research shows is we all care. We care, and we're welcoming. We welcome students to class, but I want to unpack this. Welcomeness to engage is another level. It's sad, but it's a sad fact that students are hesitant to engage with us because they've had bad experiences in math classes. They're expecting us to have certain behaviors. So we often pay lip service. Hey, we want to hear from you. But welcomeness to engage is really signaling to students that their engagement with you as a faculty member, that you welcome it and it's desired, and it's not a one and done. You've got to constantly reemphasize it. And this is a space where you can really increase students coming to office hours if they really sense that you really do want their engagement. Often we're so focused on keeping on track with our lesson plan that we really can't engage students. Okay, the next one is just a general equity practice, which is knowing your students. You can't really connect with your students and help them unless you know where their challenges are. So that's what the second one is. The third one relates to validation. Aspirationally, we'd hope that we're validating students, letting them know that we believe in them, that they're doing good, that they can do this. But what we really saw in classes is just that students' questions and concerns are validated, which means every question is a good question, and addressed in a timely fashion. And you can think about how that might relate to a sense of belonging and trust. And then the last one is performance monitoring, which some of us think that we shouldn't have to do that, but actually students benefit from it. We did a video or a webinar for IMACC on this performance monitoring. We saw people doing a lot of reminding students of deadlines, performance expectations around showing work, faculty walking around classrooms, monitoring performance that way. Many of us have colleges that have the early alert systems. Research is showing that sometimes that's a little bit too late when it's implemented. So all of us, as we begin the quarter, should be finding who are the students that aren't submitting work right at the beginning and intervening. Students like it when we get intrusive and in their business. We just have to do it the right way with the right disposition so they know that we really do authentically care. So what I'm hoping out of this is as you go forward, you can think about as you're teaching, you're doing some things just for mathematics, and then you're doing these other things to build the relationship, the relational part of teaching. So in summary, some of the themes around this general idea of our goal is developing programs and strategies that are race conscious, that disproportionately bolster the success of racially minoritized students and these themes, placing them fairly, optimizing courses, enhancing out-of-class support, creating positive environments for learning, including relational practices, and gaining the institutional commitment to support racialized minoritized students if your college isn't already there. Let's open it up for questions, which could be grab the microphone, that's fine with me. And I'm going to shut off my video so that we see all of us tiled, or you could put it in the chat window. But thank you. And thank you, Michael, again, for inviting me.
Of course, thank you so much, Helen. Really appreciate it. I'm going to put that web page again with those self-assessment tools. I did this similar with Helen back at IMACC, and these self-assessments can be very helpful if you're planning on starting or continuing some sort of a EDI initiative at your school. So I put those in again. And so I would really recommend you just seriously and from the heart take those to see what's actually has already occurred at your schools is going on at your schools right now. So yeah, I did turn off muting. So if anyone has any questions for Dr. Byrne, we have about 6 minutes or so, or you can put it in the chat as well. So
yeah, or raise your hands. I changed my view up in the right corner to gallery view. So now I'm seeing everybody. Wonderful. Hey, who'd like to ask a question?
Abby Bailey wants to ask a question. Go ahead, Abby. You should be able to unmute yourself.
I actually do have a question. Yeah. So when NIU had like the Chance program, which is their version of kind of a DevEd sequence, it was really, it pinpointed a certain underrepresented population. Lily, can you turn that off? And I know I have a kid here, that's why my screen was off. But they did away with it. They moved a little more towards the co-rec model because it was so evident that those classes were designed specifically for certain people who tested at a certain level, and they all ended up with the same color. And it was clear when you walked down the halls that you saw a classroom of that brand, of a certain race. So my question is, if we want to do disproportionate, like increase the equity by doing something more, right? Then how do we do it in a way where it's not just so blatantly obvious that we have pinpointed certain, I don't know how to say it, so that they don't feel that self-identity as well, like, whoa, you've been chosen and you need this.
Okay, I love your
don't.
question, and I think everyone else can appreciate the bravery that you're trying to say what you're saying in a space where clearly we're so uncomfortable talking about race, ethnicity. All right. So I'm just going to say by example, like we have a MESA program. MESA is obviously for students of color. Okay, it's for Black and brown students at my college. And my colleagues were like, how do we get people involved without saying, hey, we need you to do this because you're Black and it's going to help and you need help, and having a deficit orientation. So we developed a script for that. So as an example, and it was like, hey, you see a student and you as a faculty member know, hey, that would be a good candidate for this support program. So do you talk to the student and say, hey, you know, I know that sometimes students like to learn individually, but some students really benefit when they're part of a community. So what I'm doing is I'm using the research. It's not the skin color, it's the community that students benefit from. And again, some people do like to do it alone. A lot of us were very individual learners. So you would say to the student, you know, some people like to do it alone, but some people really like community. Does that sound like you? So we're entering it from a theoretical. We know that this matters, but we're not using like race explicitly. However, there's kind of nothing wrong with being explicit about it too. You will find yourself, the more you do it, you get more comfortable because students know it. Students know it's up. They know that there's racial disparities. So, hey, we've got an Emoja program. It's a Black scholars program. All right, here's the benefit, but I don't hesitate to say it's a Black scholars program. You're an African-American, you qualify for the program, and here's the benefit. But thank you for bringing that up, Abby, about that issue. Thank you. We have time for just a few more. Does anyone else want to take a chance and ask a question?
No, nobody wants to step in? Okay.
Oh, I'll always ask a question.
Oh, Bob will always ask a question. Go ahead, Bob.
I always have one in my back pocket. In my 30-year career, the biggest change has been the improvement of women in mathematics. At the start, we had very, very few taking courses at the advanced level. I've seen dramatic changes. And in racially minoritized groups, the women are doing much better than they have done before, but we are still lagging behind dramatically with African-American and Latino men.
Yeah.
Suggestions?
Okay, so I
How do we
think
handle
you bring up because I know we have you're right, 30% of PhDs go to women now, and women are half of community college faculty. So clearly the master's degree is happening. So I would guess to say that's a great example of if I gave you a piece of paper and say, give me 3 things that you think have led to this increase of women in math. 3 things, what would they be? Okay, so that's where I think we're at with race, ethnicity. It's the same thing. I think we could all articulate something that's different that makes the classroom better for women or the process better for women. Okay, so how can we take that to race, ethnicity? And then your point about gender crossing with race, you're right. Women generally are dominating in education. In fact, there's some concern that education is becoming a feminine space, and that is influencing male engagement. And it's heightened in certain racial subgroups. Like if you look at African American, the gap between women achievement and men achievement is larger than within like Asian American male female achievement. So you're absolutely right. And that's why when we look at disaggregated data, our recommendation for our equity practice is it's not to look at race within ethnicity. So Bob, I would recommend you go look at some of the literature on male identity development, because we've kind of done a lot for women. The cooperative learning movement would be an example in that. And so we've yet to really design for around male identity in a racialized space. I guess I want to close by saying, hey, I'm sensitive to the fact that we all have to be technology experts now to teach math. We have to know our math, we have to know our technology. And now we're being asked to be kind of experts in student psychosocial adjustment and racial equity. All right, that's a big order, but I don't want to overwhelm you. I believe it's doable, but you do have to educate yourself a bit about the the situation and the research. Thank you for having me here today. Michael has my contact number, and I'm happy, because I'm like you, at home with Zoom. I'm happy to connect with anyone who'd like to.
Thank you, Helen. Thank you so much for spending some of your Friday morning, I think, for you.
Yes, it's still morning here.
here at the conference. All right, so we're going to do a quick shift over to the ICCB update. Give me a second because I'm running both of these, so I'm going to quickly close this out, and then we will move into the ICCB update. Thank you, Helen, and thank you all for participating. Take care. Thanks, Helen.
All right, thank you.